For this project, I will be looking at two different films, Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers, in a critical lens, comparing and contrasting the films using class concepts to answer the question of why did the two films, given their conceptual similarities, have such different reactions in terms of national reception. I will specifically be looking at audience reception and national identity. Letters from Iwo Jima and Flags of Our Fathers are conceptually similar as they take the same situation, the Battle of Iwo Jima between the Americans and the Japanese during World War II, and look at that battle from the two perspectives to tell a story about the humanity aspect of the war, both of which are based on true stories from the war, the book Flags of Our Fathers and the book Picture Letters from the Commander-in-Chief, along with the letters found on the island of Iwo Jima. Both films were released around the same time. Letters was released in Japan on December 9th, 2006, and received a limited release in the United States on December 20th, 2006. Flags was released on October 20th, 2006, in the United States. Both films are also by the same director, Clint Eastwood, who explains his ideas about the films.
Tried to show the futility of it all, and I think these experiences from real people that really existed were an opportunity to bring to life, at least in my mind, and hopefully in audience's minds, that there was also the atrocities from both sides, and that nobody in war is immune from that.
While the films have conceptual similarities, the way in which they are depicted in both films are very different. First of all, the plot is different in both. In Letters from Iwo Jima, the story follows the Japanese soldiers defending the island of Iwo Jima, starting from the Japanese preparations of the Americans arriving and then chronologically through the battle until it is over. The film follows a few different men, each very different, but capturing their humanity and emotions during the stressful and grim reality that they are not going to survive the battle. Flags of Our Fathers takes the opposite perspective of the Americans, who at this point in time had hopes about winning the war, but shows a group of soldiers who had a difficult time with the war in general and saw an escape to get out of the war. While the Battle of Iwo Jima is part of the events, the film flashes back and forth between three different time periods, showing the infamous image of 6 men hoisting up an American flag after they secured the island of Iwo Jima, and then unpacking the effects that image had nationally. There are very clear differences throughout both films, especially because it tells two sides of the historical events of the Americans gaining control over the island and the Japanese surrendering. In the film, American director Clint Eastwood uses his own lens to rewrite someone else's truth in both the American and Japanese perspectives. This is incredibly important in terms of analyzing audience reception, as this is an interesting and difficult perspective and point of view to film these two films. In terms of audience reception, overall, Letters from Iwo Jima was more successful than Flags of Our Fathers. Comparing Japan versus the United States, Japan was more successful, which is the second largest film market in the world. In Japan, Letters ranked number 1 at the box office for 5 weeks, dropping to number 3 after 6 weeks, compared to the United States, where the film only got up to number 14. Then, comparing audience reception between the two movies specifically, in the United States, according to Rotten Tomatoes, Letters received an audience score of 86% versus Flags, which received a 69% audience score. Letters won 24 awards with 39 nominations, compared to 15 awards with 28 nominations that Flags won. In total revenue, Flags grossed $33 million domestically, $65 million worldwide, with a $90 million budget, compared to Letters, which grossed $13 million domestically, $68 million worldwide, and with only $19 million budget, which means Letters from Iwo Jima was higher in terms of overall revenue, overall cost production, rankings, and commercial viewing. After comparing the similarities, differences, and statistics about both films, it is clear that generational memory plays a huge part in national audience reception. National identity, preconceived notions, and prior information, or lack thereof, about the Battle of Iwo Jima plays a huge role in audience reception in the United States versus Japan for the two films. In the case of the United States, the U.S. Battle of Iwo Jima is taught in schools, in history textbooks, and there are many World War II movies about it, where everyone knows how the war ends. Specifically, the American perspective of Flags of Our Fathers is just one of many films that is interesting regarding the story of the famous image, but it is not something new, per se, in terms of history. However, the film Letters from Iwo Jima was incredibly significant in Japanese culture. As with many historical events, the victors often write the history and the other perspective is often left out. What makes Letters fascinating in terms of generational memory is both that Japan did not have much filmic history about World War II and the fact that the history that was written was from an American perspective about another culture's generational memory. One critic reviewed that, quote, Japan celebrated the film's anti-war message and its largely unbiased portrait of Japanese, unquote. Another review of the movie said, quote, as a person in the Japanese movie industry, I have the slightly embarrassing sensation that we should have turned our attention to the Battle of Iwo Jima and filmed something on the theme earlier. The film helped provide generational recovery for many and enlightened others about an entirely new part of history. While the idea of generational memory is conceptual and shown through the entire film, certain scenes in particular capture the message of generational memory particularly well. The first example is the scene in both films where the Americans are storming the beaches. In Flags of Our Fathers, the perspective comes from the Americans 26 minutes into the film as the audience is watching the Americans storm the beach in masses from the perspective of the American troops. The mise-en-scene is important because there is a sense of security and safety the audience feels by watching the men who are on the offense outman the Japanese soldiers and have courage that they are going into the battle prepared. The scene goes on for several more minutes as the Americans storm the beaches in Iwo Jima. Letters has the same type of scene. 55 minutes into the film, as the Americans are storming the beaches, there is so much anticipation, tension, and emotion as they know they are outnumbered. The mise-en-scene shows the complete opposite point of view, creating feelings of concern and despair for the audience, and the entire film has led up to this point. The complete opposite emotions that both scenes created is due to the fact that historical accuracy of what happened during the war, and how on one side the Americans know they were victorious, and the Japanese somewhat knew, or maybe even didn't know, nor had ever experienced this historical event. In fact, there's a quote, "Letters from Iwo Jima," arrives during a time of general debate about whether young Japanese know enough about the war. Certainly some young moviegoers have been surprised by the brutality of the fighting. End quote. The scene is so powerful because it was one of the first times it was cinematically displayed, and whether or not Japanese people knew about it, seeing it was extremely robust. The second example are the scenes focusing on signs and symbols in both films. In Flags of Our Fathers, the main symbol is the image of the flag. This photo, which is extremely well known for its nationalism in the United States, is shown in a new way. The symbol signified the inhumanity and political aspects behind the war. While the men are extremely upset about their friend and fellow soldier dying, this scene shows how the photo that sparked so much nationalism during the war was methodically fixed in order to gain more money for the war efforts. This scene is powerful because it changes people's ideas about this historical photo. The symbol in Letters from Iwo Jima is honor suicide, which signifies the true realities of war and the self-sacrifice that was practiced in Japanese culture during World War II. Burgoyne argues, quote, "The three scenes of honor suicide seen in the most positive light map the act of self-sacrifice onto a new discourse of cultural memory," unquote. The signifier of self-sacrifice is deeply rooted in the culture, which makes the symbol of suicide in the film extremely important, especially for all of those who did not know about the practice. This is one of the most important scenes in the film. This portrays the honor-suicide of General Kuribayashi right after the flashback of one of the general in the most happy times. This flashback makes an impact of General Kuribayashi's death even more significant and emotional, and really adds to the emotional part of generational memory. After comparing the two films, it is evident that they are both incredibly compelling films that aim to show war in a different light with a humanistic and emotional perspective. Both films focus on pathos and uncovering ideas of generational memory through many filmic techniques. The impact of historical recovery is what sets Letters from Iwo Jima apart. According to Burgoyne, the film's reception in Japan suggests that its impact on cultural memory was pronounced, generating an emotional reawakening, as if a missing part of the national story had been rescued from oblivion. The way in which Letters from Iwo Jima is able to show historical events that have been almost culturally erased is a prime example of why filmic history is so important.